Okay, and this brings us to the third and final part of this discussion of the Han Chapter 2, or Reading 4. If you recall earlier, we haven't yet covered the other two models, the inclusionist nature-culture continuum and the inclusionist multiple aspect. Let's first deal with the inclusionist nature-culture continuum. This is the second of the three models. Of course, the first model was the exclusionist. We talked about that in the last video. According to the inclusionist nature-culture continuum model, a sickness can be located at any point along the continuum, the natural, biological, cultural continuum, and once again refer to your handout if you could, and you'll see the inclusionist nature-culture continuum model is here at the bottom, and as you can see, any particular malady will be located somewhere along the continuum. So for example, this one here would be a malady that's thought to be primarily attributable to natural or biological causes, whereas this particular malady here would be thought primarily to be attributable to cultural causes, hence the location. You can also have some that are in the middle, so almost half one way, half the other. In other words, about half the cause of these particular maladies here is natural, the other half is cultural. Anyway, the point being, any malady can be located at some point on the continuum, except they cannot be located exclusively at either end. You'll notice there's nothing exclusively at this end or exclusively at that end, because that would get us up to this model, the exclusionist model. Right? So they're located at any point on the continuum. Okay, so if you're talking natural and cultural factors, this would be like maybe 90-10, 80-20, 70-30, 50-50, all the way down to maybe 20-80, 10-90, etc. Okay? So, for example, amok and lata would fall right around here on the very cultural side, whereas things like measles, tuberculosis, etc. would fall down here on the very natural side. Perhaps in the middle you would locate such things as depression, which could be somewhat natural, somewhat cultural. And then finally, the third and final model is the inclusionist multiple aspect. And from the point of view of the inclusionist multiple aspect, and you can see that model here, all maladies are located right here at the center point of the continuum. So in other words, all maladies are somewhat natural, biological, and also cultural, pretty much to an equal extent. Therefore, there's only one X here for the location of this sort of malady. They all are somewhat natural and somewhat cultural, falling right in the center of the continuum. There's a quote in your textbook. It's on page 49 in regard to that model I would like you to look at. And read with me on page 49 of your textbook, 1 to the third indented paragraph. The inclusionist multiple aspect position takes a stance distinct from the nature-culture continuum position, asserting that all human conditions are equally biologic and cultural and social, cognitive, psychologic, and psychodynamic, and so on. Biology, anthropology, and psychology do not have more or less weight in given conditions, for each considers a distinctive aspect of a common phenomenon. The multiple aspect position thus makes the same claims for measles and tuberculosis as for depression and culture-bound syndromes. in the multiple aspect position, all syndromes are regarded as equally culture bound, so that the concept of culture bound syndrome is itself not a useful distinction. In other words, since everything is thought to be somewhat natural and also somewhat cultural, we have no exclusively culture-bound syndromes. So, in which models does the concept of culture-bound syndrome make sense? Obviously, in the exclusionist model, since they specifically and overtly designate some maladies as being strictly cultural. Also, in the inclusionist nature-culture continuum model, there are some maladies that are very close to the cultural end, so we could certainly say that the idea of a culture-bound syndrome is somewhat valid from that perspective. But then in regard to the inclusionist multiple aspect, since all maladies are equally natural and equally cultural, the distinction culture-bound syndrome really has no place and no relevance. All right, just to wrap up this discussion of Chapter 2, there are four basic principles that Hahn mentions near the end of the chapter, and I thought we would cover these just briefly. Of course, you can find them yourself, but I thought we would delineate them at this time. So four basic principles in conclusion here. Number one, a cross-cultural theory of sickness should at least begin with the indigenous understanding of the sufferers. In other words, you should have some grasp of the what's called the emic, E-M-I-C, the insider's point of view. So we should probably start there, because even though that's not going to get us everywhere we want to go, it is at least necessary that we have that knowledge, that insider's knowledge. Another way to put this is like this. For an understanding of a sickness, the insider's perspective is necessary, but it will not be sufficient. In other words, yes, we do need it, but we also need more than just that. So necessary, yes, but not necessary and sufficient. And that, by the way, was principle number 2. sorry about that. So the whole discussion regarding the necessary but not sufficient nature of insider knowledge, that actually is principle number 2. So once again, principle number 1, to understand sickness, we need to start with the insider's point of view. Principle number 2, that understanding is necessary but not sufficient for the understanding of sickness. Sorry about that. All right, now number 3, all syndromes, all sicknesses will include some cultural aspects and some natural aspects to some extent. The weighting could be 30-70, 40-60, 80-20, whatever the heck, but it will include some natural aspects and some cultural aspects. Then number 4, the ideology of a particular society will affect their understanding of sickness and disease. Okay, once again, the ideology of a particular society is going to affect their understanding of a particular sickness or disease. What's important there is that you could have the same thing occurring in society A and society B, but because they possess different ideologies, they will interpret them differently. Okay, well, that concludes our discussion of Chapter 2 in the Hahn textbook. And if there are any questions regarding this material, now this will basically take the place of the lecture on Chapter 2. However, obviously, if you have questions or concerns about anything, we can certainly discuss them in class. If you'd like me to go back over something in class, no problem. We can certainly do that.